The silent neighbor. It was a quiet autumn afternoon when Emily first noticed the new tenant moving in next door. Her apartment building, located in a peaceful corner of the city, rarely saw new faces, so the arrival of someone unfamiliar piqued her curiosity. She watched from her window as a moving truck pulled up, and a few boxes were quickly unloaded by movers. There wasn't much to see, no furniture, no heavy lifting, just a few modest cardboard boxes. But what intrigued her the most was the tenant themselves. They never showed their face. Emily waited by her window, hoping to catch a glimpse of the new neighbor. But the movers were the only ones visible. As they finished their work and drove off, the door to the apartment remained closed. Strange, Emily thought. She had been living in the building for nearly 5 years, and she knew almost everyone. This new neighbor seemed different, though. Reclusive. Private. The days passed, and despite her attempts to introduce herself, the new tenant remained invisible. The door never opened when she knocked, and no sounds came from the apartment. The only sign that someone lived there was the occasional flicker of light through the curtains and the faint scent of food drifting through the shared hallway. Emily tried not to dwell on it. Maybe they're just shy, she reasoned. One evening, as Emily returned from work, she found something unusual waiting for her. A folded piece of paper was slipped under her door. Curious, she picked it up and opened it. "Could you please water my plants while I'm away?" "Thank you." The note was written in neat, careful handwriting, but there was no name, no signature, and no explanation. Emily glanced down the hallway toward the new tenant's door. Was this from them? She hadn't even seen their face yet, but the request seemed harmless enough. Emily debated for a moment but decided to respond. She grabbed a pen and wrote a quick note in return. "Sure, I'd be happy to help. Just let me know where your plants are." She slipped the note under their door and went back to her apartment. For the next few hours, she found herself thinking about her mysterious neighbor. Why didn't they just knock on her door or introduce themselves? Why leave notes instead of speaking face to face? The next morning, another note appeared under her door. "Thank you. The key is under the mat. The plants are in the living room. I'll be back in a week." Emily hesitated for a moment before retrieving the key from under the mat. She unlocked the door to the apartment and stepped inside. The space was sparse, just a few basic pieces of furniture, nothing personal. The walls were bare, and there were no photographs or decorations, which made the place feel almost empty. The only real signs of life were the plants, dozens of them, placed carefully by the windows. Ferns, succulents, and potted flowers filled the room. As she watered the plants, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Who lived like this? No photos, no books, no personal touches, just plants. She glanced around but saw nothing that offered any clues about the tenant's identity. There were no signs of hobbies or interests, no clutter, no noise. Over the next few days, Emily dutifully watered the plants and checked on the apartment. Each time, the place felt more and more like a puzzle she couldn't solve. On the final day before the tenant's expected return, something changed. When Emily entered the apartment, she found a note on the coffee table. "Thank you for taking care of the plants. I'll be back tomorrow." But this time, the note wasn't alone. Beneath it was a photograph, an old, black and white picture of a young woman standing in front of a house. The woman in the photo had a stern expression, her hair pulled back tightly, and she held a suitcase in her hand. Emily turned the photograph over, hoping to find a clue, but the back was blank. Confused, Emily left the apartment, wondering why the neighbor had left the photo for her. Was it a gift? A message? She couldn't make sense of it. The next day, she heard footsteps in the hallway. The tenant had returned. Emily waited, hoping to finally meet them in person. But the hours passed, and the door remained closed. She considered knocking but hesitated, unsure of how to approach someone who communicated only through notes. A few days later, Emily found another note slipped under her door. "Would you like to have tea?" This was the first real invitation from the mysterious neighbor. Excited and a little nervous, Emily wrote back. "Yes, that would be nice." "When?" The response came quickly. "Tomorrow at 3 p.m. I'll leave the door open." At 3 p.m. the next day, Emily stood outside the door, hesitant. She knocked lightly, but there was no answer. True to the note, the door was slightly ajar. She pushed it open and stepped inside. The apartment looked different this time. There was a small table set for two, with a teapot and cups placed neatly in the center. But the tenant was nowhere to be seen. Emily called out, "Hello," but no one responded. She waited for a moment before noticing another note on the table. "I'm sorry I can't meet you in person. I find it difficult to speak. But I enjoy your company through these notes." Emily sat down, feeling both confused and intrigued. The neighbor's communication was strange, but there was something oddly comforting about it. Over the next few weeks, they continued to exchange notes, growing more familiar with each other. The notes became longer, more personal, and Emily found herself looking forward to each new message. Though she never saw her neighbor's face, their silent friendship deepened. In a world filled with noise, they had found a quiet, meaningful connection through the simple act of writing. And in that silence, they learned more about each other than words alone could ever express. The auction. Mark hadn't spoken to his grandfather in years, so when the call came, informing him of the old man's death, it hit him harder than expected. The memories rushed back, summer vacations at his grandfather's country house, the musty smell of old books, and the mysterious attic filled with relics from another time. Despite their estranged relationship, Mark had always admired his grandfather's eccentricity, a man who loved collecting the world's forgotten artifacts. Weeks later, Mark stood in that same house, now empty. His grandfather had left no will, no instructions, except for one odd note. "To my dear grandson, Mark. Take care of the collection. There is more to it than you think." Mark wasn't sure what that meant, but he did know one thing: the collection was valuable. His grandfather had amassed rare items from around the world, everything from ancient scrolls to Victorian clocks. It was a hoarder's paradise, but instead of junk, it was filled with treasures from forgotten corners of history. The plan was simple. Mark would hold an auction. The collection, with its eclectic mix of rare books, old letters, artifacts, and memorabilia, would be enough to pay off his own mounting debts and still leave him with a comfortable sum. But as Mark sorted through the items, something caught his eye: a small, ornate box, tucked away in the corner of the attic. It wasn't marked or cataloged, which was odd because his grandfather was meticulous in labeling every piece in his collection. Curiosity piqued, Mark carefully opened the box. Inside, wrapped in faded cloth, was an old, leather-bound book. Its pages were yellowed with age, and its cover was worn and cracked. But what made Mark's heart skip a beat was the writing. The language was unfamiliar, a strange dialect of English, but not quite the one he knew. It looked archaic, like something out of the Middle Ages. He flipped through the book, careful not to tear the fragile pages. It was filled with handwritten notes, diagrams, and strange symbols, as if it were a guide to some long-lost secret. At the back of the book, something else fell out: a letter, sealed with a wax stamp, addressed to his grandfather. Without thinking, Mark broke the seal and unfolded the letter. The handwriting was precise, almost too perfect, and the language was even stranger than the book. It was English, yes, but an old form of English, the kind you'd find in ancient texts or religious scriptures. The letter read, "To the keeper of the book. What you hold is the key to the past. The secrets contained within these pages must never be spoken aloud, for they hold the power to alter history itself. Guard it well, for there are those who would seek to use it for their own gain." Mark frowned. What was this? A joke? His grandfather had always had a taste for the dramatic, but this seemed different. There was something about the language, the formality, the seriousness of the words that sent a chill down his spine. He sat down, his mind racing. He had no idea what the book was or what it contained, but he knew one thing: it was valuable. Maybe even more valuable than the rest of the collection combined. The thought of selling it, though, made him uneasy. What if the letter was right? What if the book did hold some kind of power? And why had his grandfather kept it hidden? Determined to find answers, Mark reached out to a local historian, Dr. Elizabeth Harding, an expert in ancient languages and rare texts. He arranged a meeting, bringing the book and the letter with him. Dr. Harding was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 40s, with short hair and a piercing gaze. She took the book from Mark, her eyes widening as she carefully examined it. "This is extraordinary," she muttered, running her fingers over the pages. "The language is a form of Old English, but it's mixed with something else, something even older. It's like a hybrid of several ancient dialects. Where did you find this?" Mark explained the situation, showing her the letter as well. Dr. Harding read the letter slowly, her expression growing more serious. "This letter, it's warning someone to keep the book hidden. And I can see why. If the contents of this book were ever made public, it could change everything we know about history." Mark leaned forward, intrigued. "How so?" "The symbols, the diagrams, this is not just a regular text. It's a map of sorts. A map to knowledge. Secrets that were never meant to be uncovered. If someone understood how to read this fully, they could potentially unlock things that were thought lost to time." Mark felt a shiver run down his spine. He had stumbled upon something far bigger than a mere auction piece. "So what do I do with it?" he asked. Dr. Harding looked at him, her eyes grave. "You mustn't sell it, Mark. This is too dangerous in the wrong hands. There are people, collectors, scholars, who would do anything to get their hands on this. You should hide it, destroy it even." Mark wasn't sure what to believe. Destroy it? The book was priceless, and he needed the money. But the thought of selling it, knowing what it could do, left him uneasy. That night, Mark couldn't sleep. He kept replaying the historian's words in his mind. What if the book really was dangerous? But what if it wasn't? He needed to know more. The next day, Mark made a decision. He wouldn't auction the book, not yet. Instead, he would study it, learn its secrets, and decide for himself what to do. Over the following weeks, Mark immersed himself in the text, consulting Dr. Harding for help. The deeper they delved, the more they uncovered. The book was filled with knowledge that had been lost for centuries, ancient technologies, forgotten sciences, hidden histories. It was like holding a piece of time itself in his hands. But as they studied, Mark began to notice strange things. Unfamiliar people started appearing around his neighborhood, strangers watching him from a distance, following him as he went about his day. His phone would ring late at night, but no one would speak on the other end. Someone, somewhere, knew he had the book. And they wanted it. One evening, while working late in his apartment, Mark heard a knock on the door. His heart raced. No one ever visited him unannounced. He peeked through the peephole and saw nothing, just the empty hallway. Nervous, he opened the door, only to find another letter, sealed with wax, just like the one he had found in the book. Trembling, he opened it. "You've gone too far. Return the book, or face the consequences." Mark's hands shook. Whoever had sent this letter wasn't playing games. He was in danger, real danger. But there was no way he was going to give up the book. Not now. Not after everything he had uncovered. He took the letter to Dr. Harding the next morning. Her face turned pale as she read it. "We need to hide the book, Mark. And quickly. Whoever wrote this means business. We're not dealing with casual collectors anymore. These people will stop at nothing to get what they want." But Mark wasn't ready to give it up. The book had become his obsession, his key to understanding his grandfather's legacy. He wasn't just holding an ancient artifact. He was holding history itself. And he wasn't ready to let go. The Couchsurfer's Dilemma. Natalia was no stranger to travel. In the past 5 years, she had journeyed across more countries than she could count on both hands. From bustling Asian cities to the quiet countryside in Europe, she had always found a way to make herself at home, no matter where she landed. But this time, things were a little different. After spending her last penny on a flight to Dublin, Natalia found herself on the verge of homelessness, at least, for a night. Hotels were out of the question, her savings were almost gone, and she didn't know anyone in Ireland. That's when she turned to couch surfing. She had used the app once before, years ago, but now, with no other options, it was her only lifeline. Scrolling through the available hosts, she spotted someone whose profile seemed perfect, Liam, an Irish musician with a cozy apartment in the heart of Dublin. His reviews were glowing, describing him as friendly and generous, always willing to show his guests around the city. Natalia sent a request and hoped for the best. To her surprise, Liam responded within minutes. "You're in luck. I have a free spot tonight. Come on over, and I'll make you some tea." Grateful and a little relieved, Natalia grabbed her backpack and made her way to Liam's apartment. The streets of Dublin were lively, the smell of rain mixing with the scent of baked goods from nearby cafes. She arrived at his building and knocked on the door. Liam opened it with a broad smile. He was in his late 20s, with messy brown hair and an easygoing manner. "Natalia, right? Come on in. Tea's almost ready." His apartment was small but warm, filled with musical instruments, guitars, a keyboard, and a violin hanging on the wall. The tea kettle whistled, and soon they were sitting at the kitchen table, chatting about their travels. Liam had been all over Europe, playing music in pubs and festivals. He loved the nomadic lifestyle, but Dublin, he explained, would always be his home. As the conversation flowed, Natalia noticed something interesting: Liam's English. His Irish accent was strong, but it was the words and phrases he used that fascinated her. It was like she was hearing a new language altogether. Phrases like "what's the crack?" "What's the fun?" and "grand, everything's good," were completely new to her. Liam noticed her confusion and laughed. "You're not used to the Irish way of speaking, are you?" Natalia shook her head, smiling. "Not at all. I've never heard English spoken like this before." "Well, you're in for a treat. Irish slang can be tricky, but once you get the hang of it, it's grand," he said with a wink. "Tomorrow, I'll take you to a proper pub, and you'll hear all sorts of colorful language." That night, Natalia lay awake, thinking about how much English changed depending on where you were. She had spent time in the UK, the US, and Australia, but Ireland was something else entirely. She realized this couch surfing experience might be more of a language lesson than she had anticipated. The next morning, after a breakfast of soda bread and tea, Liam led Natalia through the cobbled streets of Dublin, pointing out landmarks along the way. The city was alive with history, but it was the people that captivated Natalia the most. Everywhere they went, Liam seemed to know someone, whether it was the bartender at the pub or the street musician playing a fiddle near Temple Bar. At the pub, they settled into a small wooden booth, and Liam ordered a pint of Guinness for himself and a cider for Natalia. The place was buzzing with conversation, and as they sipped their drinks, a group of Liam's friends joined them. The rapid-fire conversation that followed was full of Irish slang, jokes, and words Natalia had never heard before. It was like trying to decode a secret language. Liam leaned in, noticing her puzzled look. "You all right there?" "Yeah," Natalia laughed. "I'm just trying to keep up. It's like I'm learning English all over again." One of Liam's friends, Aoife, grinned. "Ah, don't worry. You'll get the hang of it. By the end of the night, you'll be talking like a local." As the night wore on, Natalia picked up more and more of the lingo. Phrases like deadly, meaning awesome, and gobsmacked, shocked, became familiar. The conversations flowed easily, and soon Natalia felt like she was part of the group. The friendliness and warmth of the Irish people were contagious, and despite the challenges of the language, she found herself falling in love with the city. After a few days in Dublin, Natalia prepared to move on to her next destination, Melbourne, Australia. She said her goodbyes to Liam, promising to keep in touch, and headed to the airport. Her next host in Melbourne was Jake, an Australian surfer who lived near the beach. When she arrived at his apartment, the contrast between Dublin and Melbourne was stark. The sun was shining, and the salty breeze from the ocean filled the air. Jake greeted her with a laid-back smile and a pair of flip-flops. "Day! Let's hit the beach." As they walked along the shore, Jake's Australian English washed over her like the waves. Words like arvo, afternoon, heaps, a lot, and reckon, think, were completely new to her. Once again, she felt like she was learning a new version of the language. Jake was easygoing and loved to chat about surfing, but Natalia soon realized that his vocabulary was almost entirely centered around the beach. He talked about rippers, big waves, frothing, being excited, and shark biscuits, new surfers. It was like entering another world where the language revolved around the ocean. As they sat on the sand, watching the sunset, Natalia reflected on how much her English had evolved during her travels. Every country, every city, and every host had taught her something new, not just about the language, but about culture, people, and how we communicate in different ways. After a month in Australia, Natalia's next stop was Canada. Her host, Sam, lived in Toronto and worked as a chef in a trendy downtown restaurant. He welcomed Natalia with open arms, offering her a tour of the city and, of course, some of his homemade dishes. Toronto was different again. The English here was closer to what she was used to, but Sam's culinary vocabulary added a new layer of complexity. In the kitchen, words like mise en place, everything in its place, and umami, a savory taste, became part of their daily conversations. Sam explained the finer points of food preparation, and Natalia soon found herself learning the language of the kitchen as much as English itself. Her couch surfing experiences were no longer just about finding a place to stay. They had become opportunities to immerse herself in the nuances of the English language, picking up regional slang, accents, and cultural references along the way. By the time Natalia returned home from her travels, she had not only seen more of the world but had also gained a deeper understanding of English as a living, evolving language. Each place she had visited, from Dublin to Melbourne to Toronto, had taught her that language is more than just words. It's about culture, connection, and the way we relate to one another. For Natalia, couch surfing had turned out to be much more than a travel solution. It had become a journey of language, culture, and self-discovery. The Librarian's Secret. Emma had always loved books. As a child, she would spend hours in her local library, lost in the pages of adventure novels and tales of distant lands. Now, as a librarian in a small town, she found herself surrounded by books every day. But lately, something was missing. The library was quiet, too quiet. Fewer people came in, and the shelves were gathering dust. Emma felt a responsibility to breathe life back into the library, to turn it into a place where people wanted to be. She decided to organize a weekly storytelling session for children, hoping to ignite their love for reading just as she had experienced in her youth. The first week, only a handful of children showed up, but Emma was undeterred. She read them classic fairy tales, complete with voices and gestures, drawing them into the stories. As she finished, she noticed their eyes sparkling with wonder, and a smile spread across her face. This was what she loved about storytelling, the way it could captivate an audience and transport them to another world. But the next week, disaster struck. The library's heating system broke down in the middle of winter, and it was too cold for the children to gather for the storytelling session. Emma was devastated. She had hoped this initiative would turn the library around, but instead, it felt like another setback. In her frustration, Emma decided to explore the library's basement, a place she had never ventured into much. The basement was dark and dusty, filled with old books and forgotten treasures. As she sifted through the boxes, something caught her eye, a small, ornate key hidden beneath a pile of dusty old tomes. Intrigued, she picked it up and examined it. The key was beautiful, with intricate designs carved into its surface. What could it unlock? Determined to find out, Emma searched for a lock that matched the key. After a few hours of rummaging through old books and artifacts, she stumbled upon a locked cabinet in the far corner of the basement. The wood was worn, and the brass lock looked ancient. With a pounding heart, she inserted the key, and to her surprise, it turned easily. Inside the cabinet was a collection of journals, letters, and manuscripts that appeared to date back to the early 1900s. The writings were filled with stories of the town, its history, and the lives of its residents. There were tales of love, loss, and adventure that had long been forgotten. As Emma delved deeper into the contents, she discovered something extraordinary, a series of stories written by a former librarian named Clara. Clara had penned down stories based on the townspeople, weaving their lives into enchanting tales. Emma was captivated. It was as if she had found a hidden treasure that could breathe new life into her library. The next day, Emma began to prepare for the storytelling session differently. Instead of reading the familiar tales, she decided to share Clara's stories with the children. The thought of introducing them to the town's history through these vibrant narratives excited her. On the day of the session, Emma was nervous. Would the children be interested in stories that weren't traditional fairy tales? As they gathered in the cozy reading nook, she began with Clara's story about a young girl who saved the town from a flood. Emma's animated narration brought the characters to life, and soon the children were hanging on her every word. To her delight, the kids were enthralled. They laughed at the girl's antics, gasped at the dramatic moments, and even asked questions about the town's history. After the story, they were eager to hear more. Emma realized she had found the key to revitalizing the library, telling stories that connected the children to their own community. Word quickly spread, and soon more children began to attend the sessions. They were captivated not only by the stories but also by the idea that these tales were part of their town's history. Emma decided to incorporate interactive elements, allowing the kids to reenact the stories and even write their own endings. With each session, the library came alive. Families started visiting more often, and soon it became a hub for community activities. Emma even organized events where locals could share their own stories, further enriching the library's collection. As weeks passed, Emma learned more about Clara through the journals. Clara had faced challenges similar to her own, a fading library and a community that had drifted away from reading. Inspired by Clara's passion and determination, Emma found herself more committed than ever to her role as a librarian. One evening, as Emma was closing the library, she noticed an elderly woman sitting quietly in a corner, reading one of Clara's stories. Intrigued, she approached her. "Hi there. I'm Emma, the librarian. What do you think of the story?" The woman looked up, her eyes sparkling with nostalgia. "I'm Margaret, Clara's granddaughter. I never thought I would see my grandmother's stories here again. She used to tell me these tales when I was a child." Emma felt her heart skip a beat. "You knew her? These stories have been a wonderful addition to our library." Margaret smiled, her voice filled with warmth. Clara believed that stories kept the past alive. It seemed she was right. They spent the evening talking, and Margaret shared more about Clara's life, her struggles, her dreams, and her love for storytelling. Emma felt a profound connection with her, as if Clara's spirit had guided her to uncover those hidden treasures. Inspired by their conversation, Emma proposed an event where Margaret could share her grandmother's legacy with the community. Together, they organized a storytelling night featuring Clara's tales. The event was a huge success, attracting not only families but also longtime residents who had forgotten the magic of the library. As they gathered in the library, under the warm glow of fairy lights, Emma watched the community come together. Laughter filled the air, and stories wove connections between generations. Clara's stories had transformed the library into a vibrant space of community and connection. Emma realized that, through the simple act of sharing stories, she had brought back the heart of the library and rekindled the love for reading in her town. Clara's legacy lived on, and Emma felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The library flourished, and Emma found joy in her work again. It was more than just a building filled with books, it was a place where stories came alive, where children learned about their heritage, and where the community thrived. As she closed up the library one night, Emma glanced at the ornate key resting on her desk. It was a reminder of the adventure that had begun with a simple search in the basement. With Clara's stories guiding her, she felt ready for whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that as long as there were stories to tell, the library would never be forgotten. The Garden of Whispers. Lila had always been a city girl, thriving on the fast-paced life of urban living. But after a series of disappointments, a failed relationship, a job layoff, and the weight of unfulfilled dreams, she felt the need for a change. Seeking solace in a fresh perspective, she decided to escape to her grandmother's countryside cottage for a month. The cottage was nestled at the edge of a small village, surrounded by fields of wildflowers and towering trees. It was a stark contrast to the city, where Lila had been engulfed in the noise and chaos of everyday life. As she settled into the quiet, she discovered the hidden beauty of the countryside. One afternoon, while exploring the garden that surrounded the cottage, Lila stumbled upon a secluded area overgrown with weeds and wildflowers. The garden had once been beautiful, vibrant with color and life, but now it was forgotten and neglected. Intrigued, Lila felt a strange pull to the garden. It was as if it whispered to her, begging for attention. Determined to restore the garden to its former glory, Lila spent her days clearing the weeds, planting new flowers, and trimming back the overgrowth. As she worked, she found peace in the rhythm of gardening. The simple act of digging in the soil and nurturing plants brought her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. One evening, while watering the newly planted flowers, Lila noticed a small, peculiar stone near the old oak tree in the corner of the garden. It was smooth and shiny, with strange engravings etched into its surface. Curiosity piqued, she picked it up and examined it closely. That night, Lila found herself unable to sleep. The stone sat on her bedside table, glowing softly in the moonlight. Unable to resist, she took it into her hands and traced the engravings with her fingers. Suddenly, a gentle voice echoed in her mind, as if the stone was speaking to her. The whispers of the garden will guide you. Listen closely. Startled, Lila dropped the stone, but the voice continued to resonate in her thoughts. She felt an overwhelming sense of calm wash over her, as if the garden itself had come to life and was sharing its secrets. The next morning, Lila returned to the garden, determined to uncover its mysteries. As she worked, she began to notice subtle changes. The flowers she had planted seemed to bloom brighter, and the air was filled with the sweet scent of blossoms. It was as if the garden was responding to her efforts, thanking her for reviving it. That evening, she took the stone back outside, placing it in the center of the garden. As the sun dipped below the horizon, she closed her eyes and listened intently. The whispers grew louder, guiding her thoughts, reminding her of her dreams and aspirations. You have the power to create beauty. Nurture it, and it will flourish. Inspired, Lila began to write. She found an old notebook tucked away in the cottage and started pouring her heart onto the pages. The stories flowed effortlessly, capturing the essence of her emotions, the beauty of the countryside, and the magic of the garden. Each day, Lila tended to the garden and her writing, finding joy in both pursuits. As the weeks passed, she transformed not only the garden but also herself. The whispers of the garden encouraged her to confront her fears, let go of the past, and embrace her creativity. One afternoon, while tending to her plants, Lila noticed an elderly woman watching her from the path. The woman approached, a warm smile on her face. "I've seen you working in this garden," she said. "It's lovely to see someone care for it again. My name is Mabel, and I used to play here as a child." Lila felt a rush of excitement. "Really? I found this place overgrown, and I wanted to bring it back to life. I feel like the garden has a soul of its own." Mabel chuckled softly. "It certainly does. The garden holds many memories, and I can see it has chosen you to restore its beauty." Over the next few weeks, Mabel became a regular visitor, sharing stories of her childhood in the village. She told Lila about the garden's history, how it had once been a gathering place for the community, a place of laughter and love. As their friendship blossomed, Lila learned about Mabel's own dreams that had been set aside over the years. Inspired, Lila encouraged her to pursue her passion for painting. They often spent afternoons together in the garden, with Mabel painting the flowers while Lila wrote. One evening, as they shared stories under the stars, Mabel revealed a secret. "The stone you found is special. It has been in my family for generations. It's said to bring inspiration and creativity to those who nurture the earth. You've clearly unlocked its magic." Lila felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. The garden had not only healed her heart but had also created connections she never expected. Mabel's stories and encouragement had helped Lila rediscover her passion for writing and connect with her roots. As the month drew to a close, Lila reflected on her journey. The garden was now a vibrant tapestry of color, and her notebook was filled with stories that captured her experiences. She had found a sense of belonging in the countryside, a stark contrast to the bustling city she had left behind. On her last evening, Lila held the stone in her hand, feeling the energy pulsing within it. She walked through the garden, whispering her thanks to the plants and the earth for their guidance. In that moment, she knew she couldn't leave. The garden had become a part of her, and she felt an overwhelming desire to stay, to continue nurturing both the garden and her creativity. With Mabel's support, Lila decided to turn the cottage into a writer's retreat, inviting others to experience the magic of the garden and the power of storytelling. She would share Clara's stories, her own tales, and create a space where creativity could flourish. As she planted new seeds that evening, Lila felt a sense of purpose wash over her. The garden was no longer just a place of refuge, it was a sanctuary for dreams, a space where stories took root and bloomed. With each whisper of the wind through the flowers, Lila knew she had found her true calling, a life filled with beauty, creativity, and